there's only one group at the moment that plays grievance politics, and I think people are getting well and truly tired of being told that only one group has, a traumatising past and that everybody else is an oppressor, and that is ringing quite false now. But don't worry, Terry, despite the perpetrators filming themselves committing this hate crime and uploading to social media, there's been no progress made whatsoever about tracking down who these people are. There's been no announcements following the original one from the Premier of Victoria. But what the police did manage to do was to hunt down that one bloke who wrote Happy Australia Day on the supermarket window with a whiteboard marker. So I feel much safer now. But setting aside the probability that we'll never know who defaced these statues, Yarra City Council said they might not even replace the statue at all. In my opinion, that makes them complicit.
Well, I think that's a very fair point. I mean, again, James Cook, I think, is on the whole a benign person and benign figure in our history and a positive figure in our history. And I think even though Victoria never felt his footsteps, that he's just as valid in terms of Victorian history, because obviously Victoria would not have been settled if the British had not settled in Sydney Cove and spread from 1788. But certainly I think that's an ideologically driven excuse, isn't it, by I think it was Councillor Stephen Jolly, who has an ALP left. I think he's now a Green. He's actually gone more extreme than the ALP. Arguing
you're
that
right.
There's no place for Cook.
You're right to call them green. A lot of people have said this is a woke council. I don't know if you saw, but what we had up on the screen there was a photograph of where they put the announcement that they might not be going to put it back up. And it was sandwiched in between two other announcements. One of them was the Midsummer Pride Street Party and the other was the Rainbow Yarra Queer Festival. Now, apparently there's not enough money to repair the Captain Cook statue, but there's plenty of cash to spend on any manner of rainbow activities. Now, after trailing off a list of things that the council was, supposed to do anyway, like rubbish collection, Councillor Stephen Jolly hinted that replacing the statue would be a, quote, waste of taxpayer money. He said all of these things are a better way of spending the money than on a statue that we know is absolutely certain going to get ripped down again. What do you make of that kind of philosophy where if someone destroys an historical artefact, well, that's okay, we'll just let it go, that's a good reason to get rid of it?
If you don't like the history that it's talking about, yes, I think that's happening more and more. And I think the thing about Australia Day and the thing about these protests and the way that people like Councillor Jolly have approached our historical figures like James Cook, it's all about promoting division. It's all about promoting discord and tensions that don't need to be there. I mean, we need to focus on what unites us as a country in terms of what is good, what is positive. But just to take it a bit further, I think there's also some willful neglect, some absolutely disgraceful willful neglect of Cook's legacy in Australia at the very place that he landed in 1770 at Kurnell. And I've just come back from holidays in Sydney because I'm in Melbourne. And I took my 5-year-old to Captain Cook's landing place in Kurnell, partly because I remember it from my childhood growing up in the Sutherland Shire as quite a pleasant place to spend a picnic and do that sort of thing, but also to show her where Captain Cook landed because she's heard a bit about him at kinder, not necessarily all positive either. But the actual landing site, which is administered by New South Wales Parks and Wildlife, National Parks and Wildlife Service, but also obviously the responsibility of the state government, successive state governments, Coalition and Labor. It's overgrown. It's a mess. It's neglected. There are building sites around it, and it hasn't been kept tidy or beautiful or beautified. That any reference to 1770 in the surrounding park is only about the Aboriginal experience, of course, talking about dispossession and everything that flowed from 1770 in the eyes of the people sending the messages. I mean, nothing positive about Captain Cook at all. And I just remember that when I was a wee tot back in 1970, when the Cook Bicentenary was on, about 100,000 people went there to that site to see Captain Cook's landing being reenacted in front of the Queen and the Prince Philip and Princess Anne, as I recall. First time I ever saw the Queen, to be honest.
Well, it's so well said.
We're now ashamed of that history. This is a focal point of where modern Australia began. I mean, Sutherland Shire talks about it being the birthplace of Australia. It is. And for that willful neglect by governments, by state governments, in New South Wales to effectively desecrate that site by their neglect, I just think is absolutely abhorrent and absolutely disgraceful.
Well, it's well said, Terry, and one of the reasons why there is a civil tension brewing is because of the lack of respect and quite frankly, the hostile actions toward the majority of Australia's history for the people who live here, and they're not very happy about it. And you can't have, respect is a two-way street. You can't tell people that their entire history is terrible and then praise somebody else's history and not expect people to be unhappy about that. And that's what's going on, and that is a failure of government leadership at the highest order.